Hi.
Hello.
Yeah,
How's it
nice
going?
to see you. Good. Very well. I just finished the Adept Initiative, and yeah, everyone said I'm a significantly better person. So thank
Oh,
you
great. Okay.
very much for that, which is nice. I was always okay, but now I'm better. So that's good. My question, I guess, to you is what can we be doing this time to help you or to help the world? Or just any kind of vibes that we can be sending out, like during our meditations or self practices that we could do to better ourselves and the environment around us right now.
To help me, I mean, hey, vibes are always appreciated. Taking courses, definitely appreciated. That helps me stay afloat. Um, in terms of helping the world, I think in that first call, it's pretty much you want to be like the immovable Buddha, right? It's like, I'm going to say something somewhat controversial right now. L. Ron Hubbard had some good ideas.
Yeah.
Probably not what
Okay.
you were expecting,
Yeah.
particularly in the early days. And he took them from other people.
Mm.
But he had this great idea of the reactive mind, which I think is really brilliant, where he basically said that the reason the whole world is suffering is because we're constantly reacting to stimulus.
Mm.
And he took this from Buddhism, right? And he put like weird L. Ron Hubbard language on it. But that became the basis of this crazy Scientology thing. But that's a really good idea. It's a very perceptive and very important idea. And it's kind of like the whole world is. Gurdjieff said something similar, right? Whereas basically, like, he referred to humanity as robots, which was becoming a popular idea in the 1920s, like Metropolis and things like that. But he pointed out that essentially we're robots and we're programmed robots. And what he really meant by that is that we're just like stimulus response machines. Like we see something and then it's like, people are rioting. It's like we're all constantly in fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we're constantly reacting instead of thinking clearly or planning ahead or and the whole idea of magic, in a sense, and the whole idea of following the true will is to have a clear statement of intent for your life, and you have cut a clear groove of your own path, your own karma, because so that you're following that and you're going in a positive direction rather than what the majority of humanity does and has always done, which is simply react to whatever's in front of them, react to stimulus.
Yeah.
And so and it takes a lot of strength to do that, right? Because it also takes not just strength, but self control is the wrong word, but and self discipline is also not quite specific enough. But it basically self start. You have to be a self starter. I mean, I hate to put it like that, but it's like it takes a tremendous amount of discipline to follow one's calling in life, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Rather than and we just see this, it's like people are lost and they're caught up in the currents, they're caught up in the sloshing of the waves in the aquarium, and they don't have control because they're just responding to stimulus. So obviously meditation and the practices in the Adept Initiative are designed to rewire your nervous system so that you're not responding to stimulus, right? So that you're essentially it changes your nervous system to focus it on the inner light. So that's critical. Yoga is critical. But what you want to be is like basically what like the proper approach to crisis is simply not to allow it to budge you and to maintain oneself as an example of, as I said before, like what's it all for, right? It's like as an example of humanity's highest aspirations, because what that does is it gives people a new reference point where they're seeing all this crazy stuff. Then they see this one person who's like, well, that person seems to have their shit together, and then it's like, and then they have to reevaluate the situation and their own behavior by comparison. And that's a much better way of doing things than like lecturing people or trying to save people, which no one should ever do. Don't save her, as they say. She don't want to be saved, right? It's like it's just a nightmare, and or one should simply mind their own business rather than attempt to interfere with other people's lives, right? And that's why I was saying at the beginning, it's like, with the riots, it's like, really, is it any of my business? Only in as much as it touches my life directly, but otherwise not really, right? And so how other people act is not my business or my control, within my control, outside of the very, very, very limited quantities. So rather than, and particularly, recently, like, it's very popular for human beings to tell other people how they should live, or make laws about how they should live or whatever. And my view, which is the spiritual view, it is the anarchist view, is simply that one should follow their own true will, and provide a reference point for other people, and then how they respond is not none of my concern. Right? It's not. It's because they're adults, Yeah. And if they're not adults and I'm not their legal guardian, then they're also. It's like right. So, yeah, this is a hard spiritual lesson. It's hard, but it's essentially that one should uphold the highest dharma as one understands it, so that other people are, at the very least, perceive that as a reference point. And this is very helpful, right? So, but it has to be done in a way that there's not attachment to outcome, and that is also tricky, right? And it's like, why are you doing it? Just because it's dharma, right? Just because it's the right thing to do. Not because you're attached to what other people do, or you're trying to save people, or you're trying to change history. Like, people are saying, like, oh, like, we're going to change the world. Well, they forget that change goes all kinds of ways, right? It's like things are constantly changing. They get better, they get worse. And it's like, better or worse by whose perspective, right? Everything is constantly changing. Things will change. The world will change if you do nothing. You can just sit there and watch it, and it will change. So, the post-Enlightenment West is very much enamored of the idea of progress, and the idea that history is linear and is going towards, as they say, the long arc of justice or whatever like that. It's questionable, and the Eastern religions have a much more clear view on it, which is that change, not only does change happen on 100,000-year timelines, but that it is cyclical. And a great game to learn this is Go. The game Go, or Taoism. It's like things are constantly shifting back and forth. So when understanding that this is the case about the world, it's wise not to have too much attachment to things, because they're going to change no matter what. Anyways, that's my view on things. It's perhaps at times too passive of a view, and there is a certain, certainly the Enlightenment Masonic tradition, Hermetic tradition, Western magical tradition tends to argue, yes, but one might as well try to improve things anyways, just because otherwise one is too passive, and that's not very healthy. So this tends to be the Western view on things.
I feel like those are a lot of the messages that's out on social media right now, is, being passive is looked at as something that, it's negative. But I do feel that in my meditation over, the course, and it's just reaffirming by what you're saying, like keeping calm and keeping your head, and, being collective in a dharmic practice or whatnot has been a saving grace. So, I thank you for that answer, because I feel like it validated a lot of things that I already thought, or that's the direction I was going. So I'm glad that I'm kind of on that, especially. And then lunar eclipse wise too, I know we're being shown a lot of, I heard that we're like the forces around are kind of popping up, and then maybe the lunar eclipse will have something of a closing. I'm not quite sure.
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. No, I mean, maybe I should touch on this. I mean, it's like, I see all that stuff on social media as well. And I think, as I was talking about with the last person, she was saying being in recovery, it's like, you don't look at Twitter, you don't look at social media, all this stuff. It's like, I mean, particularly people in recovery know very well how easily the hurricane of negativity gets set off, that then becomes the need to self-medicate, or the need to engage in some type of behavior that is unhealthy. And it's like people, it's like your mental health comes first. And my general view on that, like I see every time I turn on Instagram, I see people saying that, and it's like, I understand where they're coming from. Absolutely. And I'm not going to be bullied by anybody into taking a position, right? It's like, I will make up my own mind and say what I wish to say. I'm not going to be bullied by groupthink into anything. And it does have a bullying vibe to it. And it's just like, okay. And I'm just like the type of like, oh, you want me to say something? Well, I'm not, it's like, well, you want me to do something? Okay, well, I'm not going to, just because, to be, but that doesn't mean that I don't agree with the sentiment behind it.
Yeah.
It's just that there's a tremendous amount of social pressure right now to become polarized and then of course engage in violence, and just no, right? It's like that's mob mentality. It's groupthink. That's perhaps not very charitable, but there's and we see this in, well, what the first caller was saying, like, what can I do to stay safe? It's like the second you, I'm trying to think of the right words for this. Basically, there's this we're all in this giant river right now that is leading us towards something, right? And by the way, the river, like as we were saying with cop cars being lit on fire, it's like all the tremendous pressure to take a side and to become engaged in either demonstration or rioting. Well, where does that lead? I mean, it's like, don't be surprised. And again, as somebody who lived through the LA riots, it's like the LA riots lasted for 3 weeks, and then everyone woke up hungover, realizing that they'd completely destroyed their own neighborhoods, their own livelihoods, all the small businesses. I mean, people are getting shot right now.
Yeah.
I've seen people getting on Twitter being run over. I've seen people being trampled by horses. Businesses are being burned down. People are losing their whole life's work. Is this justice? Certainly, a lot of people are arguing on social media that it is. It's like, well, it's justified to destroy a capitalist system. Well, what if that's a small business person who has their entire family's livelihood is tied up in that?
And you don't have something to replace it with. That took me a long time to figure out, that I just wanted to burn down the system. Okay, but what's going to take its place? Like, it needs to happen organically, I think, in a lot of ways, personally.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's like, every time it's like this always results in things getting worse, it seems. So, and ultimately one doesn't have control. One neither has control or power in this system, nor would they have power or control within whatever was to replace it. Right? Because whatever was to replace this would immediately be taken over by the same level of bureaucratic stricture and infighting that defines this system, but simply with in the middle of a rubble zone. Right. So, and just look at history. It's like how is that? So, essentially, it's kind of like, and the other thing is like, everyone right now is experiencing the rush of violence, and anger and righteous anger, which is a rush, and it does feel good, right? But just don't be surprised when in 3 weeks they wake up and there's military out on the street, and now the new normal is, oh, you left your house without a mask on, time to go back inside. And there's troop jeeps, Humvees going up and down the street, and that's the new normal.
Fucking dystopian, horror show that we're one step away from, so yeah.
Exactly. And people are playing right into it.
Right.
It's like you walked right into the trap, it's like, anyways. I digress. So anyway, I think that particularly for spiritual people, that is my thought, and that's not passive. It's simply like, just uphold Dharma, and be the example of what humanity should be. And by the way, nobody can argue with that from any side.
Yeah.
It's like, it's an unassailable position, which is rather safe in its own way as well.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm very excited for future courses and future growth in myself and in this group. So.
Slick. Stay safe.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
I started doing a lot of reading on PTSD a couple years ago after being diagnosed with it. And I made it my job for like the past 2 years to just read everything I could find about it. And I don't have much of a spiritual background. I've just done the most introductory readings. Your courses helped a lot. But I noticed there's a lot of parallels between modern ways of treating PTSD and tons of spiritual practices. And I was wondering if maybe you can make some reading recommendations on kind of this topic of the parallels between the treatment of PTSD throughout history and spiritual practices. Not
Great.
any one particular tradition, just anything.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I will say stay tuned for the next podcast, which hopefully comes out either tomorrow or Tuesday, because it's all about this topic. And it's an interview with Cole Marta, who does PTSD treatment with MDMA. And we discuss this topic. So you'll like the next podcast.
Okay. Cool.
And this is also a really topical question because, people are, we're having some mass trauma right now.
Yeah.
And of course, that is not the same as acute trauma from specific events in one's background. But all kinds of things can cause trauma, as we know. In terms of general reading about this, the best book I've read on this is Trauma and Recovery by Judith Herman. Have you read that?
It's funny that you said that. That's one of my favorite books on PTSD.
It's a great book, right?
Yeah.
That book totally changed. That's one of the most shocking books I've read, by the way. And it completely, it really put the final nail in the coffin for Sigmund Freud for me.
Yeah, I used to be really suspicious about any writings on PTSD that mentioned Freud. But after reading that, it kind of made me like a little more willing to look into what he had to say. But I did like that she kind of started with the earliest form of PTSD diagnosis as female hysteria, and then kind of moved up to modern day. It just, I don't know, it gave me more clarity about my diagnosis, and it was really helpful.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, that for everyone who hasn't read that book, I mean, that will undermine many of the assumed truths of the modern world for you as well. I mean, it's particularly the opening, the introduction is and the whole thing about female hysteria. It's just, my God, right? In terms of the overlap with spiritual, I'll simply share from my own experience that the best spiritual practice that I have found in resolving trauma personally is Vipassana, which is basic Buddhist meditation. Now, that said, it's tricky to say spirituality is not like, it's not like, oh, take this prescription, it's because different things appeal to and work for different people in different ways. And spirituality is also like so bound up in people's individual stories and meaning making. But that said, I will say that Vipassana is probably more than just simple meditation, is the best technique I have found for that. You may get there's some benefit. Have you experimented with EFT ever?
Mm-mm.
So EFT, it stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. It was briefly in vogue in the late 2000s, and then people largely forgot about it. It is very much worth looking up. It's kind of a combination of some NLP stuff with tapping on acupuncture meridians or acupressure points. Works really well. Yeah, so look up Emotional Freedom Technique. Basic NLP, neuro-linguistic processing, can be programming. We should call it neuro-linguistic processing. That's a better way of putting it. Is pretty good. In terms of what NLP is very good for, is taking the emotional charge out of memories. Right. So NLP has a tremendous number of good techniques for decharging traumatic memories, and it doesn't make the memory go away, but it takes some of the charge off of it, which is helpful, right? And these things can be, it's like everything's a process, right? Like just like recovery, it's like recovery, processing trauma. These things are processes. They go up and down, and people go through periods of feeling like they have things handled, and then it comes back, something else sets it off, or there's and so I think an interesting way to look at it is simply just to like leverage a lot of different things and approach it from different angles and kind of build up a toolkit, a self-care toolkit, if you will, and test how different things work. But those would be my top, I think my top recommendation. Well, EFT is great because it works right away. And that particularly combined with Vipassana will work at a deeper level, but it's a pretty grueling process. But it works. And NLP also is quick, very quick, like EFT. I would recommend these things over traditional talk therapy, which in my experience is not particularly effective.
Do you mean CBT?
No, CBT actually is pretty good. And CBT is pretty close to NLP. CBT, from and I've never done CBT, but from my understanding from talking to people, I think out of the traditional therapies, if you're going to do traditional talk therapy, CBT is very good, right? And it's probably the most effective. And there's some overlaps with NLP. So if you're doing CBT or you have an angle on that, I would look into that too. I just don't have any personal experience with it, so I can't talk to it. In terms of overlap with spirituality, certainly within the Buddhist and Hindu traditions, there is a great line of thinking that is essentially that one awakens from the story of their own trauma, right? And it's essentially, a more modern metaphor would be to realize that one has been watching a movie that can be awakened from. That's very tough because it involves letting go of one's role within the movie. Or awakening from the dream. And one of the things about PTSD, and you may be able to speak more eloquently about this than I can, but one of the things about PTSD, as I understand it, is that it is essentially that what the brain is constantly reliving the event. Like it's being played over and over again, and that one is stuck in that loop. So particularly for that, EFT and NLP can be quite helpful. And so one simple trick you might try off the call is, if one can go back to the memory or memories, but see them in black and white, or it doesn't change, but now it's in black and white, or turn the volume down to very low, or put people's voices in Donald Duck voices, or see it very, very far away in the distance, right? Like a little pinpoint, like it's on a screen way, way, way in the distance. Or one can play the event backwards, like it's erasing itself. One particularly useful technique that anyone can use for any troubling thought or traumatic memory is to see the event, but to send it way off into the background until it becomes about the size of a postage stamp, to then put it in black and white, to then send it down to the lower left corner. So that would be here for you guys. Or maybe not, maybe Zoom reverses it, to send it down to the lower left corner of your visual field, but way off in the distance, size of a postage stamp, and then run it backwards to the beginning. And to do this over and over again. So it's to put the memory in black and white, way off into the distance, postage stamp size, down to the lower left corner, run it all the way backwards to the beginning. If you do that for 6 to 8 times, you will notice a remarkable discharging of the energy around the memory, so that it no longer is as much of a live wire to handle. That can be quite useful. Particularly for things like PTSD, where one is caught within a loop. Within the Hindu and Buddhist meditative techniques, I basically see, particularly the meditative traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism, as at their core systems for dealing with trauma and awakening from the traumatic nature of life. They're long processes. Very good. very good processes. I believe that whatever works for people to assist them to live a happier life is good. So I am not dualistic about anything. It's like, well, if spirituality helps, great. If NLP helps, great. If traditional therapy helps, great. If medication helps, great. Does it make you happier? Do it. It's like, it's none of my business what people do to get through this life, which is very hard. And I truly do believe that people should be able to pursue their own happiness. These are some of the techniques that I have found personally helpful. They may not be right for everyone, but maybe, at least in looking into them, maybe they'll spark something for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are you staying safe?
Yeah, I work from home pretty easily.
Okay.
It's actually been a little too easy to not leave the house, but that's a problem for another day. So
yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm turning into a vegetable here. But I'm working hard on new materials, so that's good.
Yeah,
all right, well, hang in there.
Push my mattress against the wall so I can exercise on the floor.
There you go. I should do that.
With my career, I've always been like a big softie and like kind of sensitive, and at work I would see I'm a nurse, so I would see a lot of people suffer and a lot of death and anger, and I used to cry in the med room every day, and my coworkers like, don't worry, you'll grow a thick skin, and I did, and kind of got jaded and developed a sense of dark humor, and I still use humor as a coping mechanism, but I kind of realized like this isn't me, this like tough, like hard ass kind of person, and dropped the tough guy act because I realized like I'm not being true to myself. And then when the pandemic hit, I live in New York, so just talking to my friends in the hospital and nursing homes and just hearing all these horrible things, kind of shut down for a few weeks. And you were saying fight or flight, and there's like, the third aspect, which is freeze. So I froze. But I think as time went on, I kind of unfroze myself, and I'm back. But is there a way to still be strong and tough without, like, while still being true to yourself, if you're a very kind of sensitive, soft person who cries watching the Joker, or like from a magical perspective, or just from someone who's able to kind of...
Were you crying because of the terrible screenplay?
No.
Like the writing was just like...
And they were kicking him when they were beating him up.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah.
But I don't know, like, how do you put on like a strong face and persona and go out there, but you come home and you're just like, it kind of all comes off and you kind of melt down a little bit. I call it white knuckling your way through life. And it kind of, I don't know, fucked with me. I got hurt, so I've actually been out of the hospital since March 3rd. And I've kind of just been like, oh no, what can I do? Because I'm not there with my friends at the hospital. The hospital I was at got hit really hard. And the only solace that not, being there with my friends right now is I'm not bringing this home to my loved ones. And I don't know, I've been watching a lot of your courses on magic.me, and that's been like, okay, like I'm working on something, even though I'm not directly treating COVID patients right now. But like, I don't know, how can you like be a tough guy, but not but still be true to yourself? I've had people throw chairs at me and like call me names where I just let it roll off my shoulders. But like after years of it, it's like, I just took your psychic protection course because I figured it's a great time for that. And I was wondering if there's like, something like a technique that's like on steroids at a time like now.
Yeah, for sure. Right. This is such a strange situation. Well, the general, I mean, yeah, and New York is particularly tough for that. I mean, New York for me, I lived in New York for 7 years, and New York in general makes you, it forces you to adopt a thin skin because you just deal with a lot of shit every day and you see crazy shit. And the New Yorker attitude actually, I think, is very like, New Yorkers are really friendly, but they're also, they know, like, they know their next destination, right? Yeah. And the, Lady J was one of my great teachers, who was Jen's wife, who passed in 2006. But she was a nurse, and she worked in I think they lived in Ridgewood. There's a hospital east of Ridgewood?
Not in the city directly. I'm about an hour out of it, but
okay.
I'm not familiar with their hospital system.
So, but she was super. She's tough. She's a tough broad. I mean, like, one of the toughest people I've known. And I mean, like, she was a nurse and then worked as a dom when she was not a nurse. So she was about like healing people and then hurting them. It's like, but and was a Santeria priestess and all this, and I don't think that was good for her. But basically, I mean, what we're talking about is I hate to be cliche, but we're talking about the establishment of boundaries, right? Which is in terms of, like a lot of people who are spiritual work as in healthcare or psychological care, providing or just caring for other people in general, right? And people can be not, it's like there's always the shock when you realize that, like, people are not necessarily grateful for people caring for them. And in fact, like, caregivers can be just the target of like incoherent rage, because when people are in that position, they feel that they've lost control, and then they attempt to regain control by oh, I'm just going to control this person who's right here and lash out.
That's 5 stages of grief.
There you go. But it's like, for the person on the opposite end of it, it's just like, really, and so particularly now, I mean, in general, this is a tough one. And, I definitely hit an overload point I'm from Southern California, so I'm a softie. So I just ended up back in Southern California after 7 years. That said, I mean, I miss New York. I really love it. But in general, obviously, lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, particularly when you come home, and just to establish an impervious aura, is a really good idea. But also being aware of, I will say as a more general principle, and I don't remember if I brought this up last time or not, but it's when people fling shit at you, just essentially being aware of the physical sensations and differentiating mentally, okay, this is actually, like, for instance, let me give you an example. If somebody like spews at you, like, rah, 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 which happens from time to time, and it's extremely unpleasant, you immediately get a locked up sensation in your body, and it doesn't feel pleasant, and it feels like almost like they've hurled a negative energy ball at you, right? And you physically respond to it. So a really useful thing for me, at least, was differentiating, well, actually, that's not coming from them. That's actually coming from me. Right. It's my physiological response to that. So you can just sit with a physiological response and don't repress it, like, allow it to do its thing. It's attempting to, like, it's like an inflammation response. It's attempting to process the emotions. And what happens a lot is that people misinterpret the physiological reaction for the actual thing, and then short circuit it. Like, they try to stop it. Oh, I'm tough. So no, actually you should allow it to process so that it processes out. And one of the most useful things I've learned in my life is that your body knows very well how to process trauma if you just let it, right? If you just get out of your own way and you just sit with it, like like everyone does, particularly in this culture, people do 10 billion things to avoid unpleasant feelings, where actually if you just sit and you feel the unpleasant feeling, possibly on a break at work or when you come home, just sit with a feeling and allow it to be unpleasant and just sit with it. Eventually it will clear on its own, right? Because you're trying to process it through, and as an intuitive person, you know this, but super intellectual people, it takes us a while to figure it out. Your body is your body is the primary source of emotional intelligence, right? And intelligence and your mind in general. The body and the mind aren't separate, right? So if you allow the body to move through the feeling, it's super intelligent. And Peter Carroll said at one point, it's like, he was paraphrasing Nietzsche, said that, there's more wisdom in the body than in, all of the collected written works of all humanity, right? If you just allow your body to do its thing, it will clear the trauma for you. That takes a significant amount of emotional maturity, and it takes it takes a deep understanding of time where you can just step back and say, okay, well, this hurts now, but it won't in the future. And if I just sit and feel it, it will clear and it will change, because the nature of the universe is change anyways. So hopefully that's not too metaphysical, but it's extremely practical. And the technique, the specific meditation technique for this is Vipassana, right? Which is essentially sitting. And Vipassana is the core Buddhist meditation, but it's basically just it's basically sitting there for long periods of time without moving and just noticing the sensations in your body. Sounds easy, really difficult. And because almost everything we do is to avoid that stuff. But it turns out that practice clears emotional issues really quickly, amazingly quickly. It's best done on a retreat, and the retreats are usually 10 days. But you can find them. Maybe you're aware of it.
Not right now. So as opposed to Raja Yoga?
Yeah. For most people. And people tend to gravitate towards one or the other, but Raja Yoga it's a different practice for dealing with the world right now as it is. Vipassana is a more direct technique. Raja Yoga operates on much more subtle levels of the organism, but in general, establishing boundaries in terms of, okay, what are my boundaries with the news? Right, I barely watch the news right now.
Yeah.
Right. What are my boundaries with people? You need to know internally, what is the line at which I say no? People have a real problem with this.
Yeah, I do.
Well, almost everyone.
A lot of people, everyone, yeah.
But you have to, particularly if you're service oriented, it's like, okay, well, you need to decide internally, what is the line at which I'm not okay, right? In which I have to say, okay, time out. You're angry right now. Let's return to this in 5 minutes. This is not okay for me. And people will push you until they get that very often. And in almost all cases, they will stop at that point. And in a lot of cases, when people are exploring, or they're range finding, or they're testing, they'll keep pushing until they find that, because they need to know where that is with people. And this is why, for instance, people who are apparently friends, give each other shit constantly, right? In the various different ways, because they're trying to find where that point is for somebody. So, because then they feel like they know that person, and they know where they can trust them and where they can't. So, also these general psychological tool of I messages, where if somebody hits your no point and you're communicating with them, a good conflict resolution method is to communicate in I messages, meaning instead of you are doing this and you need to stop, it's I feel really uncomfortable right now, and I'm not okay with this, and I need to go somewhere else, or whatever it happens to be. You can't argue with an iMessage, right? It's like, well, you can't say, no, you don't feel that way. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. So, but I think in general, also, it sounds to me like you are perhaps feeling guilty about not being on the front lines.
Yeah.
And that might be part of the underlying thing as well. And
you walk out the doors. Thank you, healthcare workers, and people messaging me, thank you for your service. I'm like, I'm out on disability with busted neck right now. And then I have to tell, like every day, I took off that I'm a nurse on some of my stuff, and it's just like, I feel really guilty. I like talk to my therapist about it. I'm just like, like literally I got out of work a week before this like really hit in New York.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So,
and you don't think that might have been for a reason?
I think it was. I was at my wits before.
Yeah. And how helpful can you be to people if?
Yeah, exactly.
And do you think that there will not be a need for healthcare workers in the future?
No, absolutely.
Even in this situation?
Yeah, even
2 years from now?
Yeah. This done a lot. It doesn't negate it.
Do you think they're part of the message? Do you think that it's possible that you might have been, what was happening there was you being, that you're needed later, and therefore it's important for you to sit this cycle out?
Yeah.
And that possibly that other people are more suited or more positioned to deal with what's right now, but you will be better positioned and suited to deal with things later?
Okay.
If you got taken off a week before, I mean,
it's crazy, the timing.
So sitting out around is not quitting.
No.
Right. And in fact, it may be better strategy, because if you were already at your wit's end, then you weren't well suited to that role anyways, and somebody else would be better suited to it at that time. Right. So it may not have been helpful for you to be helping at that time or now.
No.
So how does that change it?
I don't know. That kind of makes me feel like that I wasn't good enough to help, but just definitely not in a good space. But I wasn't the only one. Everyone was kind of like, they've had it.
Yeah. But everything's a team effort. Right.
Absolutely.
And just to reiterate, sitting out around is not the same as not being part of a team.
No, absolutely.
And it's clear to me that you have a very good heart, that you are very focused on helping, and that you will be helping, and that you may be helping at a time where you're better rested and you're much more suited to the job at hand.
Absolutely.
Right? In which case, might it actually be critically important for you to be resting and doing your own thing right now, so that you can be more effective to help people later?
Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.